Bow! We there, innit? We there, we're back. We're back. Episode 11 of the Chinksey Sports Presents, the Premier League show. Right, straight into it. All right. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. So, last week, the first game of the week was at Selhurst Park between Crystal Palace and Tottenham Hotspur. Ended 2-1 to Spurs. London derby under the lights. Last week, Friday, Spurs headed to a tricky, hostile Selhurst Park, a place where they've struggled over the years, knowing that a win would propel them to be 5 points clear at the top of the Premier League. But unfortunately for them, because their immediate rivals Arsenal, Liverpool, and Man City all won, and comprehensively at that, are now in a position where they can find themselves fourth in the table going into their grudge match with Maurizio Pochettino's Chelsea. I think the dynamics of that match are interesting though, because I believe that Chelsea will bite your hand off for a point against Spurs. But I think that Spurs would expect to beat Chelsea at this stage, which hasn't always been the case over the years. But it should be a good, tricky match, but we'll get into that a bit later on. Second game was on a Saturday, one of the few 3 o'clock kickoffs, and it was at the Vitality Stadium. Relegation 6 pointer, classic relegation battle. So obviously Bournemouth came out 2-1 victors in that game through a late goal from Philip Billing, who's head and shoulders Bournemouth's best player, and he got the winner in a match that neither side could afford to have lost. So yeah, man, it looked like it was gonna be a draw. I had that game down as being a draw, but Bournemouth pressed on, and obviously they managed to get their first win of the season. It's been a long time coming, but both teams now are on 1 win apiece and 2 wins between them. I mean, it's a heavy blow for Burnley, although you could argue that Bournemouth needed the win more because they hadn't won in the league all season up until that game. So it at least eases the pressure on Andoni Iraola, the Bournemouth manager. The only problem is the next fixture is later on today against Manchester City away from home. A team that look like they've clicked into gear. Right, the next game was at the Emirates Stadium, and it ended 5-0 to Arsenal. Props to Eddie Nketiah for bagging his first senior hat-trick for the Gunners, for Arsenal. He even had the luxury of passing over the chance to bag a fourth from the spot to new father Fabio Vieira, who bagged the second half penalty and dedicated it to his newborn child. I'm sure a lot of people will say that it's only Sheffield United, the San Marino of the Premier League, but you got to look at it this way. Has every other striker bagged hat-tricks against them this season? Has Erling Haaland? They're the questions. One thing I can tell you though is that Arsenal don't tend to score 5s and 6s that often over the years. I mean, they might get a 4 and a 5 here and there, but usually when they do, it's against promoted sides or right at the end of the season when it's meaningless, when teams are on the beach. But having said that, the score in this particular game was only 1-0 to the home side at half time. And you could argue it was relatively in the balance at that stage. So, Arsenal took the game away from Sheffield United in the second half with 4 goals. With 4 more goals, 2 more of which were from Nketiah. The next fixture, and so obviously two more were from Nketiah, and Tomiyasu scored and Fabio Vieira scored. The next fixture was, I believe, the 5:30 kickoff at Molineux between Wolverhampton Wanderers and Newcastle United. Ended 2 apiece. Desmond. Newcastle will rue this result and view it as more drop points. Wolves, on the other hand, will be ecstatic with this point as their season rebuild continues. Since their 3-1 to defeat to Liverpool in September, they've been unbeaten, and that includes matches against the likes of Manchester City, Aston Villa, and now Newcastle. So they've played some tough teams and come out unscathed. Yeah, who have incidentally all three of them games were at Molineux, so that's saying something. They're basically good at home. But yeah, Newcastle once again dropped points from a winning position away from home. They also did it against West Ham. Is it a hangover from the Champions League, even though they made a few changes? Not the greatest result for Newcastle, but they're plugging away, and I think they're believe they're sixth, if I'm not wrong. Right. Another 3 o'clock kickoff was at Stamford Bridge. Whether this is a shock or not is an interesting question. But Brentford won 2-0. Crazy to think that this is the third time in a row that Brentford have beaten Chelsea at Stamford Bridge. However, the only reason that this may be deemed a surprise is because of both teams' recent form and performances. Chelsea could count themselves unfortunate and unlucky to not have beaten Arsenal the previous weekend, so would have expected to build on that and beat the Bees with a similar performance. But that wasn't the case. Brentford stifled the Blues and frustrated them. They then made a game. They made the game basically a 20-minute game, with it being 0-0, and stung them twice in the counter-attack with goals from the impressive Ethan Pinnock and Brian Mbeumo, who also assisted the first goal. So Mbeumo's doing really well, and I noticed he's actually been nominated for Player of the Month. He's had an exceptional season so far, scoring a lot of goals in the absence of Ivan Toney. And he's obviously the man that Brentford looked to for goals and just invention all round. Right. The first of many Sunday games was at Anfield. It wasn't the first one, but it was one of the many. Yeah, at Anfield between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest, ending 3-0 to the mighty Reds. Liverpool's three starting forwards, Darwin Núñez, Diogo Jota and Mohamed Salah all scored. For me, having watched more Liverpool than 99% of sides this season, I can safely say that Mohamed Salah has been the player of the season this year, definitely. I think that Liverpool now have Cody Gakpo back, and albeit they're missing Luis Diaz, but it's a frightening proposition. You could say all five could and should get between, at least 10 goals and probably at least 5 to 10 assists each. And you could probably say in the league alone. In what could end up being a remarkable season for Jurgen Klopp's men, who alongside Arsenal, Tottenham, Aston Villa and Man City are within touching distance of top spot. Obviously, Liverpool followed up that win with a victory against Bournemouth in the Carabao Cup in midweek, in which they won 2-1. So they were rewarded with a win and a quarter-final bout against West Ham at Anfield, if I'm not wrong. I believe it is, yeah. Right. The first game of Sunday was Aston Villa against Luton Town at Villa Park and ended 3-1. Aston Villa continue their impressive form and look like they ain't going anywhere anytime soon. Villa generally tend to batter teams when they win, so they're getting 3s, 4s and 5s regularly, especially at home. So it was no surprise when both happened on Sunday. They seem to have settled on a first choice 11 consisting of Martinez, Matty Cash, Ezri Konsa, Pau Torres, Luca Dean, Douglas Luiz, Kamara, John McGinn, Diaby, Zaniolo and Ollie Watkins. The fact that people like Diego Carlos, Yuri Tielemans and Leon Bailey can't get into the regular Premier League side speaks volumes for their strength and depth. They are definitely contenders for the top 5 Champions League spots this season, alongside the likes of Newcastle, Brighton, Spurs and Manchester United. And the scary thing is, they've got backing behind them, and they're probably going to go into the transfer market in January to improve their squad. And don't forget, they're missing a few players through injury as well. So yeah, right. I would say one of the shocks of Sunday on the weekend was at the London Stadium after West Ham United lost 1-0 at home to Everton. Shocking performance from West Ham. Their worst of the season. But you've got to give it to Sean Dyche and got to give him credit for setting Everton up in a resolute manner to give them the platform to win the match late on, similar to what Brentford done to Chelsea. West Ham had Europe during the week, and although they made changes for that match, they looked sluggish and didn't really trouble Everton, who got a much needed victory in their bid to stay up and avoid the ignominy of playing their first season in their new stadium in the second tier, the Championship. But West Ham, however, after losing 3 consecutive games, knocked Arsenal out of the Carabao Cup with a much improved performance. And yeah, like I already mentioned, they rewarded with a trip to Anfield in the quarterfinals. Another game was between Brighton and Fulham, ended 1-1 at the Amex. A good point for Fulham against the Brighton side, who now haven't won in 4 league games after a series of tough fixtures. This one was probably a game they would be looking at picking up 3 points, but it wasn't to be the case. After seeing off a poor Ajax side in their midweek Europa League game, Roberto De Zerbi would have been looking to build on that win and start building up momentum following their schedule. But Fulham hung in there and nicked a point in the end. They now face a tough trip to yeah, what am I talking about? Yeah, so Brighton face a tough trip to Liverpool as they take on a rejuvenated Everton at Goodison Park. That's going to be a tough game, that one. Boom, 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 boom. And obviously, Fulham take on Man United in 14 minutes at Craven Cottage. It's going to be a good game. Yeah, so the next one, last game of the weekend, but not least, was the Manchester derby between Manchester United and Manchester City. It ended in a resounding 3-0 away win for Manchester City. Definitely Manchester City's best performance of the season. Once I saw Manchester United starting 11, especially in terms of the composition of it, with the midfield consisting of Scott McTominay, Christian Eriksen, and Sofian Amrabat, I just thought there was no legs. And then when you put Bruno Fernandes on the right, I knew it was going to be a long day for them. It's actually scary to think how they'll be how Man City would be with Kevin De Bruyne added to the side. And also the fact that Andre Onana pulled off 1 or 2 worldies to stop it from being a real rout. I felt like Man City kept, if they wanted to, they could have got a couple more goals and they could have really, really just stuck the knife in United. But I mean, they got their 3 goals and just coasted through the game, really. So yeah, that was last week's fixtures. That's last week's results. Now to this week's fixtures. Yeah, I think last week mainly went to the favourites, really. I mean, Tottenham, you would have expected them to win. I thought Burnley and Bournemouth was gonna be a stalemate. Arsenal obviously won. Newcastle, Wolves, maybe, yeah. You wouldn't be surprised at that being a draw. I think, yeah, I would say the shocks were at Stamford Bridge with Brentford winning. Liverpool obviously won. Aston Villa obviously won. And also at the London Stadium with West Ham losing to Everton. But other than that, you know what I mean? Yeah, the results weren't really surprising. Anyway, right, the first game of this weekend is at Craven Cottage between Fulham and Manchester United. My prediction is 2-1 to Fulham. I feel like this game could go any way. Could be a draw 1-1. Could be United narrow win. But I've gone for Fulham win. I just feel Fulham are a bit hit and miss, which is why I think they'll end up banging mid-table, either 10th or 11th this season. They've got veterans like Willian, Tim Ream, Bernd Leno in their side. So they've got bags of Premier League experience. They're not the greatest watch in the world, but I think they're more than capable of matching up to United and following up on a solid, hard-fought draw against Brighton last weekend, and also beating Ipswich, high-flying Ipswich, that is, at Portman Road in the Carabao Cup. United usually struggle here and only won last season after a last-gasp Garnacho smash and grab winner. Incidentally, he's playing today, starting the game in place of Rashford. I think United will still be smarting from back-to-back 3-0 home humblings by Newcastle and Man City. That being said, United will probably prefer being on the road at this moment in time, ahead of what is a crucial week for them. They face 3 winnable games at Fulham, FC Copenhagen in the Champions League before a return to Old Trafford against Luton Town in their last fixture before the international break. I can't help but feel that Ten Hag's on borrowed time right now. If they lose this, boy, oh boy, oh boy, his head could be on a platter. They need to start picking up wins sooner rather than later, though. So yeah, I've gone 2-1 to Fulham. The next fixture is Manchester City against Bournemouth. I've gone 5-0 to Man City. Man City have never lost to Bournemouth in their history and are on the back of 12 straight league victories against the Cherries and 13 in all competitions. That is crazy. Winning 12 times in a row is mental. But then again, they did it to Arsenal too. But yeah, no. Man City have just beaten arch rivals Man United 3-0 at Old Trafford. And it looks like they're really picking up a head of steam and are on like a, you know what I mean? But yeah, remarkably, City don't tend to get the 5s and 6s and 7s against Bournemouth. I've had a look at their recent results. They generally get 3s and 4s. But I have a feeling they're going to be hitting the 4s and 5s this time. I think yeah. I can see Haaland and Co getting on the back of the net. Alvarez, that's his name. I feel like we'll probably get 2 each or something. But yeah, 5-0. The next game is a London derby between Brentford and West Ham. Both teams have arrested bad recent runs. Thomas Frank's Brentford have now won their last 2 games without conceding a goal, including an impressive 2-0 win at Stamford Bridge, a place where they've won 3 times in a row. Whereas West Ham are coming off the back of an impressive 3-1 victory at home to Arsenal in the Carabao Cup. That's remarkably only their 3rd win in 33 games against Arsenal. West Ham should be buoyed by that victory after 3 successive defeats to Aston Villa, Olympiacos and Everton, and should expect to bring back the likes of Alphonse Areola in goal, Kurt Zouma in defence, their captain, James Ward-Prowse, their free kick king, and Mikel Antonio, their striker, for the trip to West London. So 2-1 Brentford I've gone. Right. Struggling Sheffield United against informed Wolves. I've gone 2-0 to Wolves at Bramall Lane. Quite frankly, it should be a Wolves win, given the form of both sides and the quality of both sides. It should be an away win, which is a no-brainer. Wolves are unbeaten in 5 league games, and Sheffield United have lost 6 straight league games, including 8-0 and 5-0 defeats to Newcastle and Arsenal, respectively. Their only point this season, the only game they didn't lose this season, was at home to Everton, 2-2. And they've lost 9 of their 10 games this season, which is mental. They really need Ollie McBurney back as soon as possible, because I don't think Rhian Brewster has enough in him to trouble the Wolves' back line. So I'm going for 2-0 away to Wolves. Right, this one between Burnley and Crystal Palace. 2 sides who've been very, very poor this season. Crystal Palace have been poor since they'd lost Eze to injury. But Burnley have been worryingly losing to the teams that you'd expect to be in and around them. Everyone assumed that their style of play would see off teams like Bournemouth, Everton, Wolves, and perhaps Crystal Palace. But that hasn't been the case so far. Their solitary win this season came at Luton Town in the midweek game. Crystal Palace, on the other hand, would have been woeful of recent and have won 1 in their last 7, and that was to struggling Man United. Neither of these sides will want to lose this one, so that's why I think they'll cancel each other out in a 1-1 stalemate. Next game is Everton against Brighton. I think this is an interesting game because Everton come into this game on the back of some impressive wins, and Brighton are struggling for form. Everton beat Brighton 5-1 away from home. I believe that was in May. but lost 4-1 to them in January last season. So it was a bit topsy-turvy, a bit crazy, a bit erratic. Those results are like a microcosm of Brighton's Jekyll and Hyde nature. They came to places like Old Trafford and the Emirates and turned Man United and Arsenal over 3-1 and 3-0 respectively. But then on the other hand, they've lost 6-1 to Aston Villa and 5-1 at home to Everton. So De Zerbi's risk v reward football does more good than harm. I just feel that Everton are riding a crest of a wave right now, and with the fans behind them, I feel like Goodison Park's going to be rocking. Obviously, Brighton are coming to terms with higher expectations this season after securing European football. They're playing football every 3 days, and it seems that they're taking time to adjust to that. However, their Barcelona loanee Ansu Fati seems to be coming into his own of recent, hitting form just in behind Evan Ferguson up front. Right, for me, the game of the day and one of the games of the weekend is at St James's Park, 5:30 kickoff between Newcastle United and Arsenal. I mean, this one is a very interesting one. I could see several different outcomes. I could see a Newcastle 3-0 win if Arsenal don't turn up. I could also see it being a 1-0 either way, but I've settled on a 1-1 draw. Not many people know that before Newcastle beat Arsenal 2-0 at St James's Park 2 seasons ago, Newcastle hadn't beat or even scored against the Gunners for over 10 years. Check it out. Arsenal's victory at St James's Park last season was seen as a relative shock and deemed one of their most impressive performances and results under Mikel Arteta, as they had to dig in deep to hold out for a 2-0 win. Both sides have had contrasting results of recent, with Newcastle going off the boil in recent weeks with a home defeat to Borussia Dortmund in the Champions League and 2 frustrating 2-2 draws against Wolves and West Ham, albeit away. They were games that they led in and would have expected to win. Arsenal, on the other hand, since beating rivals Manchester City before the international break, have went on to get a respectable point against Chelsea, beaten Sevilla away in the Champions League, and dispatched of Sheffield United with consummate ease. However, they did go on to lose to West Ham in the Cup, having rung in the changes for that match. Right, so this is Sunday's fixture between Nottingham Forest and Aston Villa. Midlands derby, I've gone 3-1 to Villa. Nottingham Forest have had a very good home record, but the trouble is they're coming up against a rampant Villa side who aren't letting up one bit. Players like Ollie Watkins, John McGinn and Douglas Luiz have been exceptional for Villa in recent weeks, and I expect them to have too much for their Midlands rivals. Forest, who haven't been great of late, are missing big summer signing Callum Hudson-Odoi and generally look like they're struggling for goals, which is with their big target men, Chris Wood and Taiwo Awoni, toiling in front of goal. Not hitting the back of the net as often as they'd like. Can't see nothing other than a high-scoring game with Villa coming out on top, so I've gone 3-1 to Villa. The next game, similar to that, I think is another high-scoring game. I've gone 4-1 to Liverpool at Luton Town. I feel like Luton are doing well to not have been caught adrift like Sheffield United have been this season. They've given themselves a puncher's chance of staying in the division. Unfortunately for them, they're going up against a rampant Liverpool side on the back of 4 consecutive wins. It feels like it's been about 8 in a row, can't lie. I've watched a lot of Liverpool this season, as I mentioned already. And if it wasn't for the horrific officiating against Spurs, they'd still be unbeaten this season in all competitions. I can't see Liverpool not scoring at least 3 in this game. I was literally I was debating between a 3-0 or 4-1. I've gone 4-1. I expect Mo Salah and Darwin Núñez to get themselves on a score sheet. Both are on form, with Jota and Gakpo also in contention to start. They might even start all 4. Luis Diaz is expected to once again miss out after his father was kidnapped back home in his native Colombia. His mum was also kidnapped, but I think his mum was returned. It's good to see that the Liverpool squad are all coming together to support him, with teammate Diogo Jota pulling out a Luis Diaz shirt after scoring against Nottingham Forest last week. Bow! The last game of the weekend, which is a Monday kickoff, is at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium between Tottenham and Chelsea. This one I feel is going to be a real tight affair, but I just feel like Tottenham have too much. The Spurs are too hot right now. I've gone 2-0 Spurs. The Mauricio Pochettino derby. This match is always a grudge match, a feisty affair. But now with Spurs' best manager in recent years in the Blues dugout, it will be interesting to see what reception he gets. Well, I think it's pretty clear. He's going to get booed. He's going to get booed. I feel like the White Hart Lane faithful are going to boo him till the cows come home. But the real question is, do Chelsea have what it takes to stop Spurs from dismantling them at ease? Well, the evidence of what I've seen from both sides this season suggests no. Chelsea do, however, seem to be performing well and better against the better sides, such as Arsenal and Liverpool, although both were at home and they didn't win either of those matches. See you next week for episode 12. Bow!